Chapter 12 of Thou Art the Man. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Thou Art the Man by Mary Elizabeth Braddon. Chapter 12. Encompassed with Darkness. It was night, and Brandon Mountford was sitting in the dismal old building by the sea, which had served as a prison house for many generations of poachers, sheep stealers and smugglers, marauders and depredators on land and water, rioters and insubordinates of every kind. It had served as a prison house in those bitter days when the criminal code was written in blood, and the full stop of every sentence was a hempen necklace. If the ghosts of all the men and women to whom those four bare walls had been the antechamber of the grave could have haunted the place, the air would have been thick with the spirits of wretched creatures whose doom, looked at in the milder light of to-day, as judicial murder. It was what the sons of the soil called an unked place. The crumbling plaster on the bare walls was blotched with straggling stains and patches of damp, and all along the lower part of the walls there had crept a dull, slimy moss, like green rust, while the brick flooring was slippery with the same parasite growth. Cobwebs had thickened in every corner, and the spider had her fill of vagabond flies which came in at the grating when the place was empty, for the window was left open day and night. The furniture consisted of a table and two chairs, large, heavy, and clumsily made, but which, perhaps from their age, might have been precious in the estimation of the collector. There was a wide old fireplace, with a grate half eaten away by rust, and which still contained the ashes of a fire kindled months ago. Dust and grime were upon everything. Neglect and decay were in the very atmosphere of the place. An all-pervading odour of dirt and smoke and mildew, desolation and despair were in the sounds that came in at yonder rusty grating, the moaning of the barren sea, and the shrill wail of the rising wind. The custodian of this dog kennel had been civil, for after all Mr. Mountford was a gentleman, and even if he were guilty and had to swing for it, he must have friends who would be likely to pay for any kindness shown him in his dark hour. With that conviction, Coxon, the village constable, had provided comfortable meals which the prisoner hardly tasted, had offered to light a fire, which the prisoner declined, had brought a newspaper and pair of candles when the evening closed in, and had sent a lad to Ellerslie for a change of linen and a supply of tobacco. Brandon's pipe had been his only solace during these barren spaces of time, before and after the inquest. He had not read a line of the provincial newspaper which had been brought for his entertainment. He had sat and stared at the sky, and pondered gloomily, brooding upon the story of the past, recalling old impressions, but most of all recapitulating the history of the malady to which he was subject, as he had read it in the textbooks, a dismal and a harmful study to a man in his case. The image of the Bavarian peasant had been with him in his solitude, the man in whom the impulse toward murder was so strong a tendency that with each fresh crisis of his malady the struggle to resist his own fierce longings had been harder, and with each recovery there had been in the patient's mind a wondering thankfulness at not having succumbed, at having gotten over the attack without satisfying the savage thirst for blood. Brandon Mountford pondered the story of this unhappy being, a man whose boyhood and youth had been mild and inoffensive, in whose warped nature the murderous instinct had only come with ripening manhood. He compared the Bavarian's history with his own. Till yesterday his paroxysms had been of a mild and normal character, but yesterday he had felt the gloom of an overwhelming despair, a burden too heavy to be borne, until, as he sank deeper and deeper into that dark gulf of despondency, it had seemed as if all the powers of hell were let loose in his brain. A rage, an agony, a revolt against fate had taken possession of him. He thought of the girl who loved him and offered herself to him, and whom he dared not take to the heart that yearned for her, dared not because of the curse that was laid upon him. He cried aloud in his anguish that the curse was devilish, not the chastisement of a just and merciful God, but the mocking torments of devils, rejoicing in their power to make man's best gifts of no avail. To-night, in the still monotony of his shabby prison house, where the fitful candlelight played fantastic tricks with the stains and blotches on the wall, as the flame wavered with every gust from the sea, to-night he recalled the sufferings and sensations of yesterday evening, and his memory grew clearer with every hour of meditation and solitude. All that he thought and felt before he fell headlong under the fir trees was clearly recorded by memory, but the period of unconsciousness which succeeded was a blank. He might have been dead in his grave for all he knew of those hours between the fall and the awakening. Anything might have happened to him, anything might have been done by him, but if that interval had not been inactive, if in that lapse of consciousness a new man had arisen within him and moved him to strange actions, there was no trace in his memory of the things that he had done. Never before had he experienced such a lapse of consciousness. His former seizures had been brief. This fit, with its appalling duration, its long period of coma or dreamless sleep, was a new development of his disease. The murder seemed motiveless, savage, the act of a maniac impelled by the lust of blood. Who else was there who so likely as the wretched epileptic to do such a deed of horror? He remembered shudderingly that he had felt a growing dislike of Marie Arnold, resenting the way in which she had thrust herself between him and Sybil, making all confidential talk impossible, and in some wise spoiling those delicious hours of innocent friendship. Yes, he knew that he had disliked Sybil's adopted sister, and that yesterday, on discovering the clue to her conduct, he had felt only a contemptuous wonder at her folly, only a careless scorn for a woman who could give her love unasked, when, if she had eyes or reason, she must know that the man she loved was devotedly attached to another. He was startled from these gloomy thoughts by the sound of voices outside his door. The key turned with a scrooping sound in the rusty lock. The door opened, and a tall, slim figure in black came towards him, hat and veil hiding the face in the dim light. But for Brandon Mountford there was only one face on earth, and he was quick to recognise his visitor. "Sybil, my Sybil, how adorable of you! My dearest girl, how shall I thank you?" He would have taken her in his arms, but she held herself away from him. She laid her hand lightly on his breast, holding him at a distance, looking him full in the face. "Brandon, I have come because I want to know the truth, to help you if I can. I know that you are innocent. You never could have committed that awful crime. You of all men on earth. It is not possible." "One would hardly think so," he answered with a curious slow smile that frightened her. In my right senses I have no inclination towards murder. I thought your friend a tiresome person when she hung upon our footsteps and never allowed us 5 minutes' quiet talk from heart to heart. I used to think that rather hard, Sybil, but that is scarcely a reason why I should murder her. No, my beloved, in my right senses, when I know what I am doing, I should be utterly incapable of such a crime, as incapable as your father or you. But last night I was not in my right senses. A sullen rage against life and fate had seized me. My soul rebelled against the God who made me, and gave me a heart to love, a mind to revere all that is fairest and best in womankind, and then said to me, "Thou shalt take no woman to thy heart. Thou shalt live and die alone." My senses grew dim in that red cloud of anger, and when I came out of that blood-red stupor, murder had been done within a few yards of the spot where I found myself. Who knows, Sybil? How dare I affirm that I was not the murderer? It was my knife that did the deed. But had you that knife about you yesterday? I think not. It is some days since I used it, but it might have been among the things in my room. I had been packing my fishing tackle, and I had been absent-minded and preoccupied all the morning. I did a good many stupid things in the course of my packing, put things into the portmanteau and took them out again in a futile, muddle-brained way. My mind was full of you, Sybil, and our parting, the parting that might be forever. I might easily enough have put that knife in my pocket instead of putting it in the case with the tackle. Oh, you must not say those things. You must not say that was possible. You must not think yourself as a possible murderer. You cannot believe yourself capable of such a crime. You cannot, unless you are utterly different from the man I have thought you, unless there can be two natures, two separate existences in one man," argued Sybil despairingly. Only now, perhaps, in this dark hour, had she realised the strength of her love. Now, when she made herself one with him, when she felt and suffered as if his guilt, as if he were guilty, was her guilt, a burden laid upon her as much as upon him, or as if this semblance of guilt, this cloud of horror which encircled him, encompassed her too, and she must struggle through this darkness to the light of truth. "Why do you say such things?" she pleaded, agonized by his silence. "You must know that you are innocent, that however the knife came to be there, near that poor murdered girl, you did not use it." "I know nothing, except that there was an interval of darkness, a blank in my existence, of which my memory tells me nothing. How can I tell that I may not have done this thing in that interval, prompted and urged by devils? You know how the tormentor, cast out of a human sufferer, drove the herd of swine headlong to their death. That may be taken to illustrate the epileptic tendency, the driving power of evil, the irresistible impulse towards some act of blind violence, the rending and tearing of the fiend within, the devilish instinct to which murder or self-destruction becomes a necessity. But you have never felt this dreadful impulse. You have read of such things, and the thought of them may have haunted you, but these horrors have never come within your own experience. When you were in the wilderness, away from civilization, almost beyond the reach of the law, were you ever wicked or cruel then, Brandon? Did you ever kill one of your fellow creatures?" She shuddered as she asked the question. "No, Sybil. I never lifted my hand against my fellow man. I was not a hard taskmaster. I never had any inclination to be cruel. Those who knew me in Africa can tell you that our black comrades loved me as if I had been their brother and their king. No, the impulse to slay was never upon me. But once, when I had the fever and thought in my delirium that I had two heads, and that all the throbbing agony was in one, and if I could shoot that I should be out of pain. My chum had as much as he could do to wrench the pistol from my hand before I could fire. I wanted to shoot that superfluous head which was causing me such agony. Yet I only knew this from the man who told me about it. I have no memory of my ravings or my attempted suicide. There sometimes are two natures in the same man, the nature in calm and well-being, the nature in storm and madness. You are an angel of compassion and mercy, Sybil. You come to my solitude as a ray of light from heaven. But you cannot help me, dear, and all you have to do henceforward is to forget that there ever was such a man. I shall never forget, and I will never believe that you were a murderer, even in delirium. It could not be. There lies the mystery, Sybil, the mystery of what can or cannot be in such a case as mine. You must leave me to my fate, my beloved, gallows or madhouse, or acquittal and liberty, whatever may happen. You have only to forget me. There is a curse upon my life which no woman shall share. The nobler, the better, the truer the woman, so much the less would I link my life with hers. It was angelic of you to come here, and you must come and go as an angel, leaving no trace of your footsteps, only peace and consolation in my heart." He knelt down to kiss her hands in a fond idolatry, and then, becoming all at once calm and practical, he questioned her as to her coming. "I walked here. I had my maid with me. She is waiting at the inn. Coxon was very good. They all know me about here, and would do anything for me, not for my own sake, but because I am my father's daughter. They all love and honour him. He is a good man, and deserves to be loved. How does he take this trouble, Sybil, this inexplicable horror?" "He feels it terribly. I've hardly seen him since the last night. He has been in his own room all day with the door locked. I begged him to let me in to share his grief with me, but he would not even open his door to answer me. He told me, almost roughly, to go away and leave him to his sorrow. He was so fonder even than I was, and yet God knows I loved her dearly, and that if I could for one instant believe that you killed her, I could not bear to see you or to be near you. I might pity you, but your presence would be a horror to me. But I know that you had nothing to do with her death. Help me find her murderer, then. That is the only thing you can do for me, Sybil. Find the motive and the murderer, if you can. You know Marie Arnold's history, her friends, her enemies." "She had no enemy. She was a kind, warm-hearted girl, and had never offended or injured anyone." "She may have had some rejected lover. There is not much difference between a jealous lover and a madman. She may have been murdered in a paroxysm of despairing love." The only offer she ever rejected was from Mr. Tweedy, the curate, and one could not suspect him of madness and despair. Poor young man. He would not hurt a worm. One never knows the men who are capable of a destroying passion. But how did her murderer come by my clasp knife? He may have stolen it, in order to fix you with the crime. Not that kind of murderer. Passion is reckless and sudden in all its acts, not deliberate and designing. The creaking door opened again, and Coxon ushered in another visitor. "Mr. Urquhart to see you, sir." "Sybil!" exclaimed Urquhart. "What in heaven's name has brought you here?" "My anxiety for a friend falsely accused of a dreadful crime. I am glad you are here, for that shows you sympathise with Mr. Mountford in his cruel position, and perhaps you can help me to save him." "I'm afraid it would need more than mortal power to do that," answered Urquhart. "Nothing less than supernatural intervention seems likely to be of any use here. We want the angel who liberated Peter. With him and a fast cutter in the offing below, we might do something." His cynical air, his scornful use of an example which to her was sacred, offended Sybil. Yet she welcomed his presence as that of someone who might be helpful to Brandon Mountford. "You mean that he ought to try to escape, to run away, as if he were guilty?" she asked. "Yes, if he's not in a position to prove his innocence, and upon my word I don't see how he is to do it. Facts are uncommonly strong. The fact that you are missing at an unusual hour, for instance, Mountford, and that you were found as you were found." He hesitated at this point, as if even for his hard nature there was agony in the thought of Marie Arnold's death. "The fact of your knife being the weapon used, your knife, stained to the hilt with her heart's blood." The words choked him, and he stopped suddenly. Then, with a frown and shrug, went on. "It's a ghastly business, Mountford. You must see for yourself how black it looks." "I see that as plainly as you. But I am not going to run away. Ain't you? Remember, after to-night, unless to-morrow's inquiry should be adjourned, you mayn't have a chance of escape. From this place, with the people about here, you may get away as easily as Bazaine got away from St. Marguerite. But if the inquiry ends in your committal, and you are transferred to Carlisle, it will be all over with you, and you must stand the racket." "I mean to stand the racket. If I am guilty, let me suffer. If I am innocent, well, I suppose Providence will watch my case, and the real facts of the murder will come to light somehow." Urquhart stared at him in blank amazement. "You talk of yourself as though you were not sure of yourself. As if you might have murdered her," he exclaimed. "I'm not sure of myself, or of what happened during my lapse of consciousness, any more than a habitual sleep-walker can be sure that no strange thing has happened during his sleep. The fact that he can remember nothing is no proof that nothing happened." No, I understand. You are right in that," said Urquhart, evidently impressed. "And this murder was so motiveless, so unnecessary. A girl whom no one could have hated, young, beautiful. Why should anyone murder her? It is a terrible case. Terrible. For if you should be pardoned on the ground of lunacy, that would mean lifelong imprisonment, at Her Majesty's pleasure. Think what those words mean. A life, Mountford, a life. There are men pining in madhouses today, who were shut up when the Queen was a young woman, when everything in this world was different than what it is today. Men who have never seen the world we live in, who would not recognise the cities they once knew or the places in which their boyhood was spent. Men whose lives have rotted away inside the walls of Hanwell or Colney Hatch. But if he is innocent, as I feel and know he is, flight would be madness. It would be to stamp himself guilty. My dear Sybil, that is a girl's heroic way of looking at things. I, as poor Mountford's friend, take a more prosaic view. All the chances are against him if he stay to stand his trial. Nobody can doubt that he will be committed for trial. On that point there can be no question. Between tonight and tomorrow night there is the possibility of getting him away. It is only a possibility, mark you, and it will require sharp action on the part of his friends, you and me, for instance, and a lavish use of money, but it may be done. After tomorrow it may be impossible. It will be impossible if the inquiry finish tomorrow. You hear what he says, Brandon? Said Sybil appealingly, the tears streaming down her pallid cheeks, her hands clasping Brandon's arm as he stood motionless, seemingly unmoved by Urquhart's urgency. Yes, I hear him, but I will take my chance. No, no, you must escape. Think what the danger is. Death, or a lifelong misery. Brandon, be rational, for my sake. He looked down at her with a smile which transfigured him. My angel, for your sake. What would I not do for your sake? But, dear love, between you and me there is a great gulf fixed. What does it matter where I live or how I die? I must live or die apart from you. Brandon, for my sake, don't trouble about the future. Providence may be kinder to us than you might think, if we are true to each other. We will get you away from this place, out of England. You will be only governed by us. We can do it, Mr. Urquhart. The people here will do anything for me. And for hard cash, interjected Urquhart. All you have to do is let us act for you. Everything must be done in a few hours. You won't refuse to make the attempt, Brandon, for my sake, for my sake. She urged that one argument which a woman thinks infallible when she loves and knows herself beloved. Is there no risk for her in the attempt? Brandon asked, turning to Urquhart. Not in the slightest. Sir Joseph is a king in this place, and can do no wrong, and his daughter shares his immunity. The people will be blind, deaf, dumb, if she asks them, and pays them. Sybil, you shall be the ruler of my life. If you wish me to make my escape, although in the very attempt I stand self-accused. No, no, it will only give you time. Who knows if some new evidence may not be found when you are far away? The murderer may confess, some clue may be discovered, some link in the chain of circumstances which no one can foresee or imagine now. Only be guided by us, Brandon, and all will go well. She spoke with confidence. Her look was full of hope as she clasped his hands at parting. Come along, said Urquhart. There's no time to lose. End of chapter 12. Chapter 13 of Thou Art the Man. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Thou Art the Man by Mary Elizabeth Braddon. Chapter 13. Grudge Die so much to die? Now, said Sybil, when she and Urquhart were walking along the wind-blown path toward the inn where she had left her maid. Now, Mr. Urquhart, what is the first thing to be done? He was astonished at the firmness of her tone, the air of resolute courage in so young a girl who had never before been brought face to face with crime or danger, a girl who, in the circumstances, might have been forgiven had she abandoned herself to hysteria in her own room, instead of being here under the dark night sky, ready to dare anything for the man she loved. You must be very fond of him, he said grudgingly, or you never would have come to this place tonight. I am very fond of him. And I no more believe that he killed poor Marie, with a stifled sob, than that I was walking in my sleep in the wood, and that this hand of mine had killed her. There was someone else, someone who will be found and brought to justice in God's own good time. Perhaps, but God's own time may be soon enough to prove his omnipotence, yet not to save an innocent man's neck. I did not think you would care so much for him as to trouble yourself what became of him. I am sorry for having so mistaken in you, Mr. Urquhart. I thought you hard and worldly, caring for no one but yourself, but the hour of trouble has shown the best side of your nature. Oh, one can't help feeling sorry for a man in such a fix as that. What you and I are going to do may be a risky thing, but if we can get him off safely, well, it will be a life saved, most likely, for I don't think the verdict would be anything less than wilful murder. You and I may know that if he did the thing he did it in an interval of aberration, but there is no evidence to show that he was ever out of his mind, and the theory would hardly hold good with a jury, and even with the Home Secretary afterwards. Nothing would ever make me believe him guilty. Ah, that's a woman's way of looking at the matter. You love him, ergo he can do no wrong. Even in a moment of lunacy there would be a special providence to keep him straight. Another man, as good a man, might give way to an irresistible impulse of jealousy and anger, the impulse to destroy the creature he loved best in the world, perhaps. Such things have been, but no such a thing could happen to your lover. There was an offensive tone in that last word which passed by Sybil like an idle wind. She was supremely indifferent about Mr. Urquhart's opinion of her conduct. She thought of him only as she might have thought of a paid servant who promised to be useful in a dire extremity. The road along which they were walking skirted the face of the cliff, and ascended toward the village, which was a little way inland, and on higher ground than the coastguard station and lock-up. A long, straggling village of pitmen's houses, with an inn at each end and a rustic shop here and there. The houses were better built than most pitmen's houses, and the village boasted a workmen's club and a reading room and an infirmary, while about half a mile off, in a rustic lane, backed by the woods which joined Ellerslie, an old grey stone manor house had been fitted up as a convalescent home, where the pitmen and their wives and children were provided with rest and care after any serious illness or any accident of their trade. The lock-up was away from everything except the coastguard, and the constable's cottage close by. It had, no doubt, been found that, with the coastguard on one side and the constable on the other, This village jail was tolerably secure as a temporary place of durance. "Tell me what we have to do," Sybil said, presently. "We have to get your friend clear away before daylight. I have been thinking about it since we left him. The only thing to be done is to get him on board a fishing smack, which will land him somewhere along the coast. The farther from here, the better. When he is on board, he can change his clothes for a spare suit of fisherman's, which can be ready for him, and his own things can be stowed away or thrown overboard. When he sets foot on land again, he must appear as a rough sea-going man, whom no one will think of identifying with the missing gentleman from Ellerslie. What you have to do is to get as much ready cash as you can scrape together, not less than £200, and bring it to me as soon as you possibly can. I shall wait for you and the money at the Fisherman's Rest, the inn at the other end of the village, not the Higginson Arms where you left your maid. And while you are getting the money, I shall be making my bargain with the men who are to find the boat, and trying to secure Coxon, the constable. I have my own account at the Carlisle Bank. My father opened an account for me on my last birthday. I can write any cheques you want." "Cheques are of no use. The men wouldn't look at a cheque, least of all Coxon, whose conscience will have to be bought. You must get me gold or notes." "It will be difficult. I could only get them from father." "Then you must appeal to your father. This is a matter of life and death, remember, and we have only 3 or 4 hours. When tonight is gone, our chance will be gone." I know. Yes, it must be done. My father must help me." They parted on the threshold of the Higginson Arms, commonly spoken of as the Arms, a house with certain pretensions, and which had been known to accommodate an occasional tourist, a low stone house with a parlour that was the pride of the landlady's heart, and whose chief ornament was a monstrous and stony-looking stuffed salmon in a glass case. Here, in contemplation of a round table furnished with a large assortment of pious literature, sat Miss Higginson's maid, Ferriby, yawning dismally. She started up at her mistress's entrance. "Law, miss, I thought you was never coming back," said Ferriby, who had been promoted from the village school to attendance on Sir Joseph's daughter. "It's 11 o'clock." "I can't help that, Ferriby. We must make haste home now. Come along." Not a word said Miss Higginson to her maid during the hurried walk through the lane and across a field to a gate which opened into Ellerslie Park. It was a long and lonely walk under a threatening sky, and Ferriby, with the vivid remembrance of last night's horror, felt as though the air were thick with ghosts. They heard the stable clock striking 12 before they came to the side door near Sybil's rooms, the key of which door was in Ferriby's pocket. "It will be daylight at 4, thought Sybil. Only 4 hours. She was glad to see the lighted windows of her father's study, and to know that either he or Andrew Orlebar was still up. "Shall I get you some lemonade and a biscuit before you go to bed, miss?" asked the maid. "You must be dreadfully tired after that long walk." "Nonsense, Ferriby. You know I think nothing of such a walk. I don't want anything, and I'm not going to bed just yet. But you can go as soon as you like. I shan't want you any more tonight." "Not to brush your hair, miss? I should like to give your hair a good brushing. That might be a relief to your poor head." No. There is nothing amiss with my head." "Oh, miss, I don't believe there can be a head in this house that doesn't ache, after what we went through last night." And Ferriby burst into tears. "Go, cried Sybil imperiously. "Do you think tears can do any good?" "They can't bring her back," whimpered Ferriby. but they ease an aching heart. Let me take your hat and scarf, miss, at least. No, haven't I told you to go to bed? Don't worry me." Ferriby, upon being thus cruelly snubbed, went sobbing upstairs. She was a year or so older than Sybil, who had taught her in the Sunday school, and whom she adored. This was the first time her young mistress had spoken so unkindly. "Who can wonder at it?" whimpered Ferriby. "We're all of us unhinged." Sybil went to her father's door, and found it locked, as it had been earlier in the evening. Sir Joseph had been in that room all day, so far as Sybil knew. There had been no family meeting at dinner. Mr. Urquhart had sat at table alone under the searching eyes of butler and footman, and, as reported by those attendants, had eaten about as much of each course as would lie on a shilling, and yet he looked cool enough, and hardly a bit cut up, said the butler. Grief in the servants' hall was more demonstrative, but did not show itself in loss of appetite. "Father, I want to speak to you. Pray let me in. It is about something urgent." She heard her father cross the room with a heavier tread than usual. He unlocked the door, and she went in, and father and daughter stood for a few moments looking at each other in the lamplight. Sir Joseph's eyelids were red and swollen, his swarthy skin was livid, and his whole aspect bore the marks of a complete abandonment to grief. Sybil put her arms around his neck and kissed him with compassionate love. "Dear father, I am so sorry for your grief. I know how dearly you loved her." "Not so dearly as I ought to have loved her, Sybil. I made her a dependent in my house, only a humble dependent. That is a bitter thought, Sybil, now that she is gone from us by such a cruel fate. My God, my God!" His hands clutched distractedly at his hair. He sank down into the chair where he had been sitting when Sybil came to the door, and the iron grey head was bowed over the table amongst the scattered papers which his trembling hands had tossed here and there in the vain pretence of attending to the day's business. "Dear father, you denied her nothing. She was like my sister. You can have nothing to regret in your conduct to her. You were all goodness. You don't know, child. Don't talk to me about her. It hurts me to hear you talk of her. The blow has fallen, and I must bear it." "Father, I want you to answer one question. Do you believe that Brandon Mountford murdered her?" "No, I do not. No, in spite of the damning evidence against him. No, for a man of his character and his lineage, my dear wife's race, such a deed must be impossible. I cannot believe him guilty, though every circumstance points to guilt. No, I believe she was sacrificed to the malignity of some ruffian who had a grudge against me." "Against you, father? Why, all your men adore you." "No, Sybil. There are always black sheep. However popular an employer may be, he is never without enemies. If I have been a good master to good servants, I have been hard as iron in my dealings with bad subjects. I have made examples when they were needed. I should never have held my own with that rough lot if I had been afraid of letting him have it hot when they tried to get the upper hand. It's likely enough that some vindictive devil struck at me through my poor innocent girl. Thank God for one thing, there were no signs of a struggle. The villain's knife took her by surprise. 3 swift blows from the savage hand. No struggle. No time for terror and agony. Death, sudden death, only death." The large muscular hands were strained across his eyes. and the stooping shoulders were shaken by the violence of his sobs. My poor girl, caught like a lamb in the clutch of a tiger. But it was death, swift and sudden. It might have been worse. Sybil knelt by his chair, clinging to him, leaning her head against his arm, trying to comfort him by mute sympathy, a love that needed no words. When the storm was over, he looked down at her kindly, but with a far-off look, as if he hardly knew her. "You wanted something?" he said. "What was it?" "I want you to give me some money, father. A good deal. At least £200 in cash. I can give you my cheque for the full amount. I have drawn very little of the £500 you paid into the bank for me on my birthday, but I must have 200 to-night, in notes or gold." Her father looked at her wonderingly, but with the look of a man whose troubled brain is only dimly impressed by any circumstance outside the point upon which all his thoughts are centred. "I don't understand what you could want with so much money," he said. "Is it for someone in distress?" "Yes, for someone in great distress." "Surely tomorrow would be time enough?" "No, it must be tonight." "How impulsive you are, just like your poor mother. There's some money in that drawer, the drawer with the key in it, some notes that were brought me this morning, nearly £300, some of my March rents. Take what you want and go. I am better alone. This muddled head of mine can't stand the strain of talking to anyone, not even to you." He rose and walked up and down the room, while Sybil knelt in front of his writing-table and opened the money drawer. The notes were of various denominations, and it took her some minutes to make up the sum she required. And then she went to her father, kissed him silently, and left him with a murmured good night. She met his faithful secretary, creeping out of the billiard-room, where there was a solitary lamp burning. "You will look after my poor father, won't you, Mr. Orlebar? He is in a sad state of mind." "Yes, I am waiting for him. I hope I shall get him to bed presently. He was up all last night. It is killing work for a man of his age. I wish you could stay with him, Miss Higginson. You might help persuade him to take some rest." No, he doesn't want me," Sybil answered hurriedly as she went toward the lobby that opened into the garden. She had not taken off her hat or jacket. Andrew Orlebar looked after her wonderingly as she vanished into the darkness of the corridor. That she should be leaving her father when her presence might have been useful to him was strange in so affectionate a daughter. That she should be dressed for walking at that hour of the night was even more surprising. While he stood thinking over her conduct, he heard the lobby door shut, blown to by the wind which was just beginning to rise. The door had slipped out of Sybil's hand while she was trying to shut it noiselessly. The sky was moonless and starless, and there was a fine, drizzling rain falling, scarcely more perceptible than dew, and it was not till she was near the end of her journey that Sybil knew the penetrating capacity of that fine rain, but by that time her thin cloth jacket was wet through. There was a light burning in a lower window at the Fisherman's Rest, but the door was shut, and Sybil stood for a few moments wondering whether she ought to knock, when she saw a bright red spot travelling toward her along the dark road, which proved to be the lighted end of Urquhart's cigar. "You have been very quick," he said as he came to her. "Have you got the money?" "Yes, £200 in notes, 20s, 10s, 5s," answered Sybil, handing him the packet. "Capital. You are a brave girl, and you may congratulate yourself in the days to come upon having saved Mountford's life. I have made my bargain with 3 of the best men in the village. They have a good boat, and they will be able to land him wherever he likes between here and the bonus. They will be ready to start before daybreak. One of them will be waiting on the beach with a dinghy. I've made everything square with Coxon. It wasn't an easy business, and he is to have £50, an exorbitant price for giving the key of the door and being deaf and dumb till tomorrow morning. He has lent me the axe with which he chops his wood, and when Mountford is off, I am to slip the key under the door of his cottage, where I can find it in the morning, and I am to knock the door of the lock-up about, smash the lock, and so on, so as to give the idea of an escape by violence. And now I'll take you to Mountford, and it will be your business to get him off quietly, without any quixotic nonsense on his part, while I look after the men. Stay, you had better take him a couple of £10 notes. He may be without money, and you'll have to arrange with him where his goods and chattels are to be sent. You can do anything with him, you see. You will succeed where I might fail. Remember, it is a question of life or death. Yes, I know. And yet I may be doing him the cruellest wrong in urging him to escape. All the world will say he is guilty. All the world will think very little about him, once he is dropped through. In the case of this kind, interest and curiosity soon die if they are not fed with the daily scraps in the newspapers. When Mountford has vanished and the funeral is over, this tragedy will be as if it never had been. Here we are at his door. Now, Sybil, I leave you to manage him. When the men are ready, I'll come and fetch him." He unlocked the door and left Sybil to go in alone. Brandon was sitting at the table in the dim light of the smoky candles, his watch lying in front of him as if he had been counting the minutes in the weariness of waiting. He started up as she entered, and clasped her hand and lifted it to his lips. "My darling, why are you about at such an hour? To think that you should care for me so much, that you should be here in this wretched hole, you, in the dead of the night, caring and thinking for me, robbed of sleep and rest and comfort for me." "I shall be able to better rest when I know that you are safe, Brandon. I offered you my love yesterday. Do you think I offered myself lightly to a man I cared about so little that I could stop at home idle and content while he was in sorrow and danger? No, you could not think so badly of me. You know that whatever a woman can do, I will do. Bar the door with my right arm, like Kate Barlass, to keep out your enemies, if need were." She smiled at him through her tears, smiled with love so irresistible that he caught her in his arms, and their lips met in a despairing kiss. "My God," he cried, "a man might live and die for one such moment as this. I am content, Sybil, no matter where I go or what becomes of me, however I may be tossed about in the tempest of life, cast on whatever strand, I must still remember and take comfort from the memory that you have loved me, and shall always love you, whatever may become of me. But now be reasonable, cool, clear-headed, and first take this money," giving him the 2 notes. "What for?" "Because you may be wandering about for some time before you can get at your own money, and you may not have much about you." "The change of a £10 cheque, of which I have given a sovereign to my gaoler?" "Mr. Urquhart was right, then, as to your wanting money. Mr. Urquhart is very thoughtful. I don't understand why he should take so much trouble about me." "It is surely common humanity in him. You and he have been companions and friends since you came to Ellerslie." "Companions, yes, I don't know much about friendship. Mr. Urquhart has always impressed me with the idea that he has only one friend in the world, the friend who goes under his own hat." "You have been unjust to him. Trouble brings out a man's better nature. He has been intensely in earnest about you, most energetic in helping you." "Yes, but why, Sybil, why?" "Brandon, are you a cynic? I know he is, but I did not think that you were an unbeliever in other people's goodness." "An unbeliever when Providence has sent an angel across my pathway? No, no, Sybil. I believe there are stray spirits from heaven, who are allowed to visit this dull earth now and then in the shape of women like you. But I don't believe in the friendship of a Hubert Urquhart. It is his money you have given me?" No, it is mine. I'm glad of that." She told him about the boat, and that all he had to do was to wait quietly until Urquhart summoned him. The interval was not likely to be long. They waited longer than Sybil had anticipated, waited with the rude wooden shutters open to the night sky, which was covered with ragged black clouds that foretold windy weather. The wind had been rising since midnight, and it had blown away the soft, imperceptible rain, and seemed to be blowing the stars about, only a few stars scattered wide apart in the dark canopy. "I'm afraid you'll have rough weather," Sybil said as she listened to the sobbing swell of the waves on the beach below and the shrill note of the wind. No, it won't be much, or if it were, I have not far to go. I can be landed at the first sheltered spot. The boat I am to sail in can hug the shore. No doubt the men know every inch of the coast between here and Bowness. They can land me where they like, as soon as they like." "Not too near here. Remember, everyone will know you are gone tomorrow. You will be hunted for." "Yes, like a hunted animal. A position of that kind does not enhance a man's sense of personal dignity. I am to wear another man's clothes, to sneak about pretending to be something I am not. I must try to talk like a Cumberland fisherman, and must inevitably be found out. My speech will betray me." He was walking up and down excitedly, with suppressed impatience. He had promised to do this thing, but he hated himself for doing it. He had, as it were, given his life into Sybil's keeping, but he could but feel he was something less than a true man in allowing a woman to dispose of his fate. He could but feel that the manlier course would have been to abide the issue of things, to wait for the worst that the world's injustice could do to him. Or if he were in very truth a murderer, would it not be better to let the law deal with him? What joy or peace could he ever know upon earth while he was unconvinced upon that point, while in his own mind it was an open question whether he had killed the girl? There was but briefest speech during that long hour of waiting. Brandon paced up and down in moody silence. All had been said that words could say between these two. The story of hopeless love had been told. Sybil stood by the open window watching those rainy clouds, amidst which the rare stars glimmered. A sky of evil omen, it seemed to her sad eyes. The dark, ragged clouds grouped themselves into a funeral train, and she shuddered as she thought of the dismal procession which was to leave Ellerslie early in the coming week. The first funeral which would leave those doors since her mother's death had taught her the inevitable end of all things human. Inevitable, yes, but not like this, not as it had come to her adopted sister. Poor Marie, she thought. I am so selfish in my sorrow for the man I love that I have no time to grieve for her. Grief will come by and by when he is safe but far away, and when I shall have nothing to think of but the friends that are lost." Brandon looked at his watch many times during that interval of waiting. 2:30. The first hour gone. 3, an hour and a half. "Your friend is slow in making his plans," he said presently. "I fear you may be missed at home. The whole household will run distracted if that were so." "No, there will be no one to miss me. I sent my maid to bed, and came out by the garden door, for which I have my own key. No one ever locks that door. We are not a nervous household at Ellerslie." Quick footsteps sounded outside, a key was turned in the door, and Urquhart looked in. "Now," he said, "all is ready. Look sharp. It will be light in less than an hour. Come, Mountford." Brandon paused on the threshold. Sybil went to him and put her hand in his, simply, confidingly. "God keep you and comfort you," she said, "wherever you may go." The words were low and fervent, and had all the earnestness of a prayer. "My beloved, if I get clear out of the trap that fate has set for me, I shall owe you my life, but it will be only a broken life without you." "Come along," said Urquhart angrily. "Don't stand there exchanging pretty speeches when every minute adds to the danger." He took hold of Brandon's arm and drew him across the threshold. "I'll come back for you, Sybil, when I've seen him safe on board." "No, no, I shall go home alone. I want no one. You had better lock the door." "No, stay where you are until I get back." He shut the door quickly as he spoke, locked it, and put the key in his pocket. "For God's sake, don't leave her there," said Brandon. "She'll be frightened in that dismal den." "Not she. You don't know what a spirit that girl has. I shall be back in 10 minutes. Come along. Follow me down the path to the beach. Look out for squalls. The track is narrow and ragged, and a slip means death." Sybil was not frightened, but she was angry at being treated like a child, locked in that miserable room, with the burnt-down candles smoking and flickering on the dirty deal table, and the rusty grating between her and the outside world. Why should Urquhart have prevented her going back to Ellerslie alone as she had come? She hated the idea of his company for the homeward walk. He would talk to her of Brandon, would discuss what had been done, speculate upon his future, and to hear Hubert Urquhart talk of the man she loved would be hateful. He had been useful. He had done things that she could not have done. With all her ardent desire to rescue her lover, he had acted while she had talked. He had the strongest claim upon her gratitude, but she did not want his company tonight. She walked across the room, and looking toward the grating, she was startled by the apparition of a face, 2 faces, peering in at her. "Who's there?" she cried. There was no answer, but she heard footsteps scuttling off in the loose shingle, and she felt assured that someone had been watching. The thought was not a pleasant one. She knew not how long or how often those unknown faces had been there. Strange, unfriendly eyes might have been peering in at her at Brandon, even in that one moment of abandonment, that kiss, which meant parting and despair. She welcomed the turning of the key in the lock, and even Urquhart's company was better than her own vexed thoughts. "Is he safe?" she asked. "He is dancing gaily over the water in the Mary Jane, with every thread of canvas straining in a favourable wind. He will be in Scotland before breakfast time at Ellerslie, and it will be his own fault if he doesn't take the first steamer that will carry him across the sea, and so make a clean disappearance." There has been someone looking in at the grating," said Sybil, pointing to the window, and she described that brief vision of two inquisitive faces. "I'm sorry for that," Urquhart said with a vexed air. "I'm sorry anyone in the village should know that you are here." Sybil was outside the door by this time, and Urquhart was examining the lock before beginning operations with the hatchet which he had brought with him. "I don't like the idea of being watched," she said. "But as to their knowing I am here, I don't think that matters." "Perhaps not, but your villager has an infernal long tongue, and you don't want the whole neighbourhood magging about Miss Higginson and her interest in a possible murderer." "I will never admit that possibility, and I don't care who knows that I am interested in him." "You're a plucky girl. Now just take a look around before I smash this lock, and tell me if the coast is clear." He had taken off his coat, ready to begin work. Sybil made a rapid circuit of lock-up and cottage, and came back to the door. "All right?" "All right. And here goes." He took a screwdriver from his pocket and tried to get the screws out of the lock. But this lock was solid enough to have locked a fortress, and the screws were embedded in rust. He could not move them. "I thought as much," he said. "The door couldn't have opened without violence. Now for a few artistic touches." He hacked and hewed the woodwork round the lock, sending the splinters flying and smashing the worm-eaten panel, which sent out a cloud of dust and rottenness at every stroke. 5 minutes' work made a ruin of door and jamb. "That will clear Coxon's character," he said. "And now to get rid of my tools." He ran to the little garden behind Coxon's cottage and disposed of the hatchet and screwdriver under a thicket of gooseberry bushes near the back door. Sybil had walked some little way along the cliff path by the time he overtook her. "What a hurry you are in," he said as he rejoined her. "There is nothing more to be done. You are sure he got off safely?" "I saw him on board the smack. If the wind holds up as it is now, he'll be far away northeast before noon." There were ragged streaks of a pale, cold grey in the east, and the sea showed faintly livid under that first glimmer of dawn. It was not a sky of pleasant omen, and Sybil, who had been reared on that coast and knew the signs of sea and sky, saw the menace of a storm. Her hope was that foul weather might be slow in coming, and that the man she loved might be safe on shore before the beginning of evil. She had nothing to say to Urquhart in the walk back to Ellerslie, and she walked her fastest, partly because of that agitated state of mind in which it was impossible to walk slowly, partly in her desire to escape conversation. But at the door he stopped her with his hand upon her arm. "How you must love that man," he said, as if the ejaculation were the result of his brooding thoughts during the silent walk. "I do love him," she answered, turning to look at him. "I am not ashamed of loving him. His father loved my mother before she saw my father's face. Fate parted them. Fate is parting Brandon and me. But I love him. I love him as the best and truest man I have ever known, except my father, or am ever likely to know." "That sounds as though you had a bad opinion of my sex in general," said Urquhart with a sneering laugh. "I don't think you're all of you perfect, but I'm not going to quarrel with you this morning, Mr. Urquhart, for you have done a kind and generous thing, and I am grateful. You will have more reason to be when you find out how general the belief is in Mountford's guilt, and how strong the net which you and I have cut through." Sybil went quietly up to her room, supposing that Urquhart would follow her example, but instead of going upstairs He waited till the sound of her light footsteps had died away in the distance. Then he reopened the door by which they had entered, and went out again into the bleak morning, away at a swinging pace toward the road that led to the railway station, distant a long 3 miles. He looked at his watch as he went out the shrubbery gate. 4 o'clock. There is a train that will do for me at 5 minutes past 5. End of chapter 13. Chapter 14 of Thou Art the Man. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Thou Art the Man by Mary Elizabeth Braddon. Chapter 14. What love was ever as deep as a grave? The fatigue that Sybil had gone through since nightfall had made no impression on her physical being, or no impression of which her mind was conscious. If her limbs ached with the tramping to and fro and up and down over the rough ground by the cliff, she had no consciousness of her pain. Her mental suffering, her keen anxieties, her grief and horror at the deed that had been done, left no room in her consciousness for the sensibility of bodily pain. She walked up and down her bedroom and in and out to her balcony in the light of a gloomy dawn, or stood looking at the sea and the sky. A wild sky, a rough sea, a livid dawn that heralded a tempestuous day, and she had driven him out into the storm. She had urged him to act against his own judgment, which would have bidden him to face his danger. Was it wise? Was it well? Now that the act was irrevocable, now that the shattered door told its story of prison breaking and ignominious flight, she asked herself that questioning with maddening iteration. Ignominious flight. Yes, that was the word. The man who flies from the face of justice must needs submit to the ignominy which attaches to all flight. Innocence should stand firm and wait the worst that fate can do. No doubt that was the idealist view of the situation. But then came the thought of stern reality, the possible conviction, the possible gallows, the inscrutable perversity of fate which sometimes dooms an innocent man to a disgraceful death, all for the want of some little clue to the thread of that labyrinth of circumstantial evidence, and get at the core of truth hidden somewhere in the midst of it. Guiltless men have been hanged, even in this enlightened age, and to the end of time there will always be that cruel possibility of innocence paying the penalty intended for guilt. On the whole, therefore, Sybil was thankful that she had helped to get Brandon Mountford out of the clutch of the law. For the time being he might suffer in honour and reputation for that escape. He might have to exist under a heavy cloud, an exile in some distant country, living under a false name, cut off from all the friends and associations of his youth. But in the years to come the clue to the mystery might be found, and the wrong might be righted. Who could have done it? Sybil asked herself, and her hands strained across her forehead, as if she wanted to wring some sudden inspiration out of her tired brain. Who could have done it? She asked herself, and then told herself despairingly, I feel as if all my thinking powers were gone. I can imagine no one who would do such a deed. Everybody liked her. She had no enemy. It could have only been some ruffian with a wild beast's thirst for blood. Some madman. A madman. Yes. Sybil turned sick with agony as she remembered what Brandon Mountford had told her about that inscrutable disease which can change sanity to madness, the sudden clouding of the brain, the maniac's impulse toward evil. Oh, if it were he, after all, if my conviction of his innocence should be a mere delusion, born of my love for him. Well, after a pause, if it is so, I am the more thankful that he is free. My poor, afflicted love, marked out by fate to bear so cruel a burden. Who would not help you to escape the bitter consequences? And then came a still more appalling thought. If he had done this thing, if his unconscious hand had taken Marie Arnold's life, who could say whether this first crime might be not the beginning of a series of murders? The murderous impulse might recur, and this man she admired and loved, this man of high birth and gentle breeding, might become a scourge and a horror to his fellow men, a wretch whose death or whose lifelong imprisonment would be required for the safety of others. She flung herself upon her bed and hid her face from the daylight, awe-stricken at the horror her own thoughts had conjured up. The wind shrieked in the chimney, and there was something hideously human in the sound. One gust more violent than the rest seemed to shake even those solid walls. There was a dreadful silence in the house next morning when Sybil awoke from a sleep of sheer exhaustion. She was lying on the bed, still wearing the black gown in which she had walked to and fro with all the dust and chalk of the road and the cliff upon it, but careful hands had spread a down coverlet over her, and the morning cup of tea, which she generally took at 7 o'clock, was on the little table by her bed, showing that the faithful Ferriby had been watching her slumbers. The window she had left open was shut, and the closed Venetians darkened the room. Sybil sprang up from the bed and ran to look at the clock at the mantelpiece. 11:15. How long, how heavily she had slept! A dreamless sleep, unshadowed by any consciousness of the sorrow that made waking so terrible. The wind had been raging when she last looked at sea and sky. The sky was calm enough now when she opened the shutters and looked seaward, a dull grey sky, but the waves were rising and falling with a slow and sullen force, and the livid patches of foam showed here and there upon the leaden-coloured expanse. She rang her bell, and Ferriby came bustling in. "Oh, how tired you must have been, miss. Regular dead beat, to fall asleep in your clothes, and to sleep from 12 o'clock to close upon 11, all but 12 hours. You, too, such a light sleeper. I've got your bath ready, but let me fetch you a fresh cup of tea first. You can't drink that stuff," pointing to the neglected cup. "It's stone cold." "Never mind the tea. Yes, I was very tired. My bones are still aching." "I don't wonder at it, miss. Dear, oh dear, what times we're living in. Such a storm early this morning. We shall hear of ever so many boats lost before dark, Hampton says." And then Ferriby related how Mr. Mountford had broken out of the lock-up in the midst of the storm, a proceeding to which she evidently attached to the idea of satanic intervention, as if he might have made his bargain with Zamiel or Mephistopheles, and how the hue and cry had been raised, and the country was being searched far and near, and the telegraph wires at Ardliston and Post Office were working as they never had worked before. "All I can say is I hope they won't find him," concluded Ferriby. He was the nicest gentleman that ever came into this house, and if he did murder that poor young lady in a fit of madness, as they say he did, why, it was his affliction, and not his fault." "Who says that he murdered her?" "Well, miss, everybody thinks he did it, and madness would be his only excuse. Not that there was anything like madness in his ways. Thomas, who always waited upon him, says there was never a politer, quieter gentleman. None of your swearing or flying out at a servant for nothing. He had rather a nervous manner sometimes, Thomas says, a little absent-minded, but never no violence. Nothing looked like being out of his mind." Poor Brandon, to be discussed and anatomized in the servants' hall, to have fallen so low, the talk of the village inn, hunted by policemen, his description telegraphed from place to place. It was nearly 1 o'clock when Sybil went downstairs, white as a ghost in her black gown, and wandered aimlessly about the house, almost wondering not to see Marie's bright face in any of the rooms. This dread mystery of death was so difficult to realise, even now, after all she had suffered within the last day and a half. The horror of the murder was ever present in her mind, but she had not yet realised the actuality of death, the disappearance of one familiar face, the silence of that voice that had ever so lately been a part of her home and of her life. Never more to see Marie Arnold, the companion of all her girlish years, the happy years in which there had been no shadow of care. Now life seemed all care and terror and difficulty. It needed all her stoicism to visit the room where the dead girl was lying, that room so quiet and pure and peaceful, yesterday defiled by the muddy boots of the coroner's jury, filled with ghoulish mutterings and whisperings. Not a trace of those rough visitors remained today. The white curtained bed rose pale in the dim light that crept through the closely fastened Venetians, and the coverlet was almost hidden under white flowers, azaleas, lilies, all the most precious blooms that the hothouses of Ellerslie could supply. Sir Joseph's own trembling lips had given the order. "Be sure there are plenty of flowers. She was so fond of flowers." "You'd like to see her, wouldn't you, miss?" asked Ferriby when her mistress was dressed. Like? No, it could not be a question of liking. Every nerve contracted with pain at the thought. Like? No. But it was her duty, perhaps, a duty she owed to the dead, to stand for a little while by that placid form which could never more rise up and hold out loving arms towards the adopted sister. It might seem cold-hearted, self-absorbed, to keep aloof from that awful room, but the great mystery offered its solemn question to Christian and philosopher alike. After this, what? Or is this the end? Ferriby's tone implied that her mistress ought to look upon the dead, and Sybil wanted to do what was right. She wanted all the household to know how truly she had loved Marie Arnold. She went to the door of the room, that room which she used to enter so gaily 12 times a day, to show Marie this or that, books, flowers, finery, to ask questions, to tell little scraps of girlish news, to discuss an idea, any sudden fancy that might have flashed into her brain. Marie had been the only close companion of those impressionable years, the years which changed the child into a woman. An upper housemaid opened the door at Sybil's light knock, and the cool darkness of the room, the perfume of lilies, suggested a chapel in some southern land. Sybil looked fearfully toward the white bed. Yes, there was that rigid outline under the snowy sheet, that which she had seen and shuddered at in painting and sculpture, but which her eyes had never looked upon until now in its terrible reality, for the father's thoughtful care had excluded the child from the room where her mother lay in that last sleep. Slowly and with noiseless footsteps she approached the bed, that when the housemaid put out her hand to raise the snowy lawn which lay so lightly over that marble form, Sybil stopped her with a faint cry. "No, no, no! Let me remember her as I knew her, not like this." She sank on her knees at the foot of the bed, covered her face with the hands, and thought a prayer for the repose of that passionate soul, such a prayer as the Anglican Church forbids, but which instinct prompts whenever the living look upon the dead. She prayed for the peace of the dead, and prayed still more fervently for that unhappy fugitive whose life was dishonoured by this untimely death, who, guilty or innocent, had to bear the shadow of crime. Her eyes were drowned in tears when she rose from her knees and took one of those fairy-like blooms from the shower of lilies of the valley which had been scattered over the sheet, and with this poor little flower in her hand, she stole softly from the room where the middle-aged housemaid sat by an open window reading her Bible in the flickering light that filtered through the Venetian shutters. For the housemaid, pious, middle-aged, and a confirmed spinster, there was a dismal relish in this quiet guardianship of the dead. To sit in a cool, flower-scented room and read the prophet Jeremiah in the spirit of unquestioning faith that seeketh not to understand what it readeth was better than to overlook housework and pry into those dusty corners which the pert young pink-frocked housemaid is apt to neglect. The upper housemaid felt the importance of her charge, most of all when Sir Joseph sat sobbing beside the bed, as he had done in the dead of night, when those passionate tears of his had startled the watcher from a profound slumber. She felt she was being admitted to the family secrets, that her situation, always a good one, would be on a higher footing from this time forward. The door closed upon the chamber of death, but scarcely had Sybil crossed the threshold when she met Herbert Urquhart in the corridor, where, even in the dim light from shrouded windows, she could see how pale and worn he was. "Are you going to look your last upon poor Maria?" she asked. No, I never look on the dead. I shouldn't like to confess as much to a sportsman, but even the sight of a dead stag harrows me. It suggests what I must come to, sooner or later. I was on my way to your boudoir." "You have news of him?" "Yes, there is news, of a sort. I want a few minutes of quiet talk with you, Sybil. I may call you by that name, may I not? All we went through together last night gives me a kind of claim, doesn't it?" "What does it matter?" she exclaimed impatiently. "If you have anything to tell me, don't keep it back. If it is bad news, I would rather hear the worst at once." She looked as if she were going to faint, and he thought she would drop at his feet. He put his arm round her to steady her, and drew her gently toward an old-fashioned settee under a large picture by Snyders, which represented the crisis in the life of a hunted boar, whose ultimate fate nobody had ever troubled to inquire into. Boar, hounds, landscape had all mellowed to a dead level of brown varnish and blue mould. She thinks only of him, cares only about him, thought Urquhart, as he seated himself by Sybil's side with his arm still supporting her. It galled him to think that she took no more notice of his arm than if it had been her old nurse's. "You have bad news," she said agitatedly. "He has been followed, arrested." "Alas, if the worst has happened, it is even worse than that." Oh, God, have mercy upon me. What could be worse, except his death?" "Ah, Sybil, that is the point. I am so sorry for you, so sorry that this man's fate should have such a power to afflict you. This man, a stranger here a few weeks ago—" "Don't talk like that," she cried imperiously. "I love him. That is enough for you to know. I am not ashamed of my love. What has happened to him? For God's sake, speak." She clutched the lapel of his coat, looking at him with wild, despairing eyes, startling him with the vehemence of her feelings. "Can you bear to hear what I must say, if I have to tell you my worst fear?" "I must bear it. Nothing can be worse than this torture." "My poor Sybil, there was a gale this morning, after the smack sailed, a gale from the southwest, blowing dead on our coast yonder. They were to put him ashore in the early morning, to come back to Ardliston with the news that all was safe. I was down at the village an hour ago, and the men had not come back. There was no news of the Mary Jane." "They may have gone farther up the coast." "Hardly, with such a wind at their back. The storm was sharp and short, but murderous while it lasted. There is a feeling of apprehension in the village. I saw the skipper's wife. She flew at me like a tigress, told me that if her husband and his boy were lost, it was my doing. It was my cursed money which had tempted him to take his boat out on such a night." "What?" cried Sybil. "Was there any danger? Did you know that there was a risk of the boat being lost? Oh, if you did know that, what a wretch you are! Luring him to his death under the pretence of saving him, over-persuading him, against his own reason. And I helped you." "This is sheer madness," said Urquhart, rising indignantly and moving away from her. "If you take the thing in this spirit, I can say no more. You knew as much about the night as I could know. You heard the wind rising as I heard it. But neither you nor I could know that there was to be a squall after daylight. You knew what I knew of Mountford's peril, and that to stay where he was meant a disgraceful death." "And to escape a possibility he has flung away his life," said Sybil despairingly. "Well, we have helped him to some purpose. If the boat is lost, and his life with it, you and I are his murderers." "It is folly to talk like this, absolute folly," Urquhart answered savagely. "If he is drowned, well, it is a better death for a gentleman than being put out of this world by the common hangman. And, after all, he was nothing to you, not even your affianced husband. Yet you have hazarded your good name for him, and now you are endangering your reason." She looked at him with a vacant expression, as if she hardly heard him, or heard without understanding. "What is the woman's name?" she asked. "What woman?" "The woman whose husband owned the boat that is lost. Or that may be lost. There is nothing certain yet. The woman's name is Kettering. Where does she live? In the lane at the back of the Fisherman's Rest. What are you going to do? As Sybil went toward the staircase. I'm going to Mrs. Kettering. What madness! You will make yourself the talk of the village. I am going to see Mrs. Kettering. The boat may have come back, perhaps. There may be good news for me at the village. What will your father think? He will not mind. He believes in Brandon's innocence as firmly as I do. He will change his mind, perhaps, when he hears that Brandon has run away, murdered Urquhart, walking up and down the gallery as Sybil had left him. He did not pace that long gallery from end to end, but turned at about 2/3 of its length, giving a wide berth to the door at the east end, the door which closed Marie Arnold's room. Marie's room. How soon it would cease to belong to her. Now, soon, that a strong personality would have passed out of the daily life of Ellerslie House to leave, to Urquhart's mind at least, a blank which none could fill. There was no good news in the little sea-coast village, not a whisper of hope to be heard in all the length and breadth of the long straggling street. Sybil found the lane behind the Fisherman's Rest, a lane of about a dozen stone cottages, full of sad faces and weeping women. The Mary Jane, with her crew of 4, had gone to the bottom, all hands on board, and there was scarcely one of those rough stone cottages whose inmates were not weeping for kinsman or husband, sweetheart or friend. The intermarriages of the small seafaring community had interwoven the whole village in the ties of kindred. There could hardly be a death at Ardliston which would not justify all the inhabitants in putting on mourning, whence it arose that Rusty Black was the chief wear from one end of the village to the other. 3 family names prevailed along the straggling street, and if the people were not Ketterings, they must needs be Hessels or Garforths, while Garforth, Hessels, and Ketterings were all allied by cousinship. Thus it was that lamentations for the loss of the Mary Jane filled the air in the narrow lane behind the Fisherman's Rest, and the dishevelled women sat crying on the rugged stone steps leading up to the cottage doors, while little groups clustered at the corners talking of the catastrophe, the fact of which no one doubted. Alas! There seemed no room for doubt, since fragments of the Mary Jane had washed up ashore near one of the most dangerous rocks on that iron-bound coast between Ardliston and Allen Bay, and it was clear that the ill-fated boat had been blown on to that rugged point, which the fishermen's wives all knew and had heard of as a devouring monster, and had been split into matchwood. Some among those time-honoured boats in their fisher fleets, gaily from Ardliston in fair weather, needed no gigantic forces of nature to destroy them. The Mary Jane had been renowned as a swift sailor, and had come off with flying colours in many a fisherman's race at the annual regatta. But age will tell, and the Mary Jane was older than her owner had ever cared to remember. Well, she had gone. She'd have lasted out our lives if my good man hadn't flown in the face of Providence to please them at the great house, them that should have known better, sobbed the widow, sitting distractedly in the midst of a sympathising group, while her little children played in a corner of the room, and the latest baby, latest in a family where there seemed to be at least 3 babies, slept peacefully in the closet bed, a bed built into the wall. capable of being enclosed with a sliding shutter. The widow started to her feet at the sight of Sybil, pushed back the ragged hair from her eyes with angry hands, almost as if she could have plucked it out by the roots. "Oh, it's you, Miss Higginson," she cried. "I wonder you've got the cheek to come and look at me and my childer. You that have made these babies orphans, and me a miserable woman, all along of trying to save your sweetheart's life. His life! What was his life worth agin my poor Jack's? Jack has had wife and childer to work for. Jack as never did wrong to man or beast in his life. Drowned trying to save your sweetheart. A murderer that ought to have been hung. Oh, it's wicked, that's what it is. God Almighty didn't ought to let such things be. He didn't ought. But there's a world too full of people now for the God Almighty to care as He did for the Israelites when there was only His chosen to look after. It's a wicked, wicked world, and you're a wicked girl, Sybil Higginson, to have tempted my Jack to risk his life for the sake of your cursed money." "Come, Mrs. Kettering," urged a motherly voice. "You've got no call to fly at Miss Higginson, who's always been your true friend." "My true friend, yes, till last night, but my bitter enemy for ever and ever after last night." "Now, Susan, you know you was all in favour of Jack's taking the job. He told you there'd be dirty weather, but you were all for making the best of it. You was, now, you must remember that." Susan Kettering threw up her arms and beat her careworn forehead with her clenched fist. "Remember, oh God, as if I could ever forget. It was to earn bread for their bairns. It was to earn more than 2 years' rent. What mother wouldn't have been eager to earn £25 by one night's work? Oh God, what a black night's work for me and mine. And it was your doing, Miss Higginson. It was all your doing." "Susan Kettering," remonstrated the woman who had spoken before, "you mustn't go on like this. There ain't no justice on it." "Oh, let her talk," said Sybil, standing on the threshold, leaning against the door post, with white face and dry, haggard eyes. "Let her talk, poor soul. But it is quite certain that the boat has gone down?" she asked, appealing to the women generally. "Is there no hope?" "No, miss, there ain't no hope. There's been enough rotten timber washed ashore to show that the Mary Jane was mashed up in that heavy sea. But it's no fault of yourn, Miss Higginson, and if Susan just wasn't crazed with grief, she'd never say such things." "No hope?" murmured Sybil with quivering lips. No hope for the grief-stricken wife and these fatherless children, but what of him for whom that fated boat had been put out to sea? He might have been landed safely before the evil hour in which the Mary Jane was blown upon the rocks. All was uncertain yet as to his fate, and her pity for this mourner with the bloodshot eyes and wild hair and distracted movements of clenched hands and writhing arms was made keener by the thought that Brandon Mountford might be safe on shore. "Was it far from here that the boat was wrecked?" she asked the elderly woman who had spoken last. "Yes, miss, 6 miles or so, if he went ashore where they think he did, on the Harari rocks. It's a bad place, that is. There has been many a wreck there within the memory of the old people hereabouts." 6 miles further north, mused Sybil. That would be near Allen Bay. "Yes, miss, this side of the bay, a mile nearer home. And Allen Bay would have been a safe place to land anyone out of the boat?" Safe enough if they could have run along shore in such a wind. But the Lord knows if they could. It was a wicked wind." "What time was the gale at its worst?" "Between 6 and 7, miss." Ah, yes, she remembered looking at the clock on her mantelpiece while that howling and shrieking of the wind was at its loudest, when the Venetian shutters were rattling as if they would be torn from their fastenings, and the solid window frame were shaken, and the massive stone chimney seemed to vibrate and tremble above the roof. Past 6, and Brandon had gone on board the Mary Jane before 3 o'clock. There would have been time to land him at Allen Bay, and more than time under any reasonable conditions of wind and sea, but who can reckon time when the frail boat has to fight every yard of progress, when the forces of nature are set against the frail cockle shell in which the low-born breadwinner tempts the sea? Still there was hope for her, though not two of Mary Jane's rotten timbers still held together. She bent over the weeping widow, gently touched the coarse, dishevelled hair with delicate fingers, and gently stroked the burning forehead, rugged with the premature wrinkles that come of toil and care, hard weather, and a hard life. "I am deeply sorry for you, my poor friend, and you may be sure that I will take care of you and these poor children always, always." "Sorry for me?" cried the widow, starting up, pushing away the gentle hand. "Who wants your sorrow? Who wants your care? Do you think I'd take another sixpence of your money, the money that bought my good man's life? You and your father think money can buy anything. What are we but your slaves? And we go about saying how good you are, how that you have got everything, while we have to toil for our daily bread in the pit or on the sea, danger and darkness both. It don't much matter which. There's always death waiting around the corner for us, while you sit at home and take your ease, and think there's nothing on this earth that's too good for you. And now, to save your sweetheart, a madman and a murderer, my true-hearted husband has gone to the bottom of the sea." "Hush now, Susan. You mustn't take on like this. It ain't fair," remonstrated the elder woman, and there was a murmured chorus of disapproval from the others. "Don't mind her, miss. She's downright daft," said one. "It's a shame to go on at you, that it has always been so good to us. She'll be sorry enough for what she has said when she comes to her right senses." "I shall be sorry for her all the days of my life," Sybil answered sadly. "Let me speak to you a minute outside, Mrs. Garforth," she added in a lower voice to the widow's elderly kinswoman. Mrs. Garforth followed quickly to the door. "Don't take any money from her," screamed Susan Kettering. "Not 1 penny of her cursed brass. It's cost me my husband. Not a dirty penny. Not—" Her voice rose to a scream, and then there came a burst of hysterical laughter as she flung herself violently on the bed, where the baby woke, looked about for a moment or two with scared eyes, and set up a piteous wail. Two other babies took up the note and squalled in sympathy. "Oh, miss, it's too bad of her," said Mrs. Garforth, when she and Sybil had walked a few paces along the lane and were out of hearing of the tempest inside the cottage. "But she ain't in her right mind. And you looking so ill, too," she added, noting the girl's ashen cheeks and hollow eyes. And such trouble up at the great house." "Yes, trouble has come upon us, terrible trouble. I never knew what it meant till now. I have never been half sorry enough for others." "Don't say that, miss. You've always been kind to us. None that was in trouble or sickness ever went to Ellerslie for help in vain. Poor Susan has no call to blame you for her loss. Jack was asked to undertake a risky job, and he was offered a good price for it, and he could say yes or no. She persuaded him to say yes, and that's what makes her heart so sore, poor creature." "Did they think there was a risk last night before the boat went out?" "Lord, yes, dear lady. Them as know the coast knowed as there was a gale comin'." "And he knew, Mr. Urquhart. He must have known." "Well, miss, he's a landsman, you see, and he's bound to know the coast, seeing Killander Castle ain't far off, but of course he wanted to get your sweetheart away, and when a man's in danger of being tried for his life, and there's only one road by which he can get away, folks can't be partickler about the weather along that 'ere road." "You mustn't talk of Mr. Mountford as my sweetheart, Mrs. Garforth. He was nothing to me but a friend, a very dear friend." "What, wasn't you and him keeping company, miss?" No. "Ah, people hereabouts is good uns to talk. They'd all have had it that you and him was sweethearts, and you was almost out of your mind about him last night, like poor Susan to-day about her Jack, and that you was at the lock-up with him best part of the night. Martha Hessel said she and Susan saw you there parting with him, and just afore he went off to the boat with Mr. Urquhart." "Let them talk," Sybil interrupted haughtily. "This gentleman is a relation. We are distant cousins. I know he is innocent. I know it by my own instinct, you understand, and my father believes in him as firmly as I do." "I should have been a cowardly wretch if I had not helped Mr. Urquhart to get him out of prison before more injustice was done. All I could do was to help with money, which my father gave me for that purpose. You can't suppose I care what these people think." She was beginning to feel the sting of public ingratitude. She had been very kind to these people, though Ardliston lay beyond the immediate surroundings of her home. She had gone out of her way to be kind to them, and had thought herself beloved by them. "I must go home," she said, drying the tears that stung her burning eyeballs every now and then, in spite of that proud spirit of hers which made her strong to bear calamity. "I want to help Mrs. Kettering and her children as much as I can. Will you look after them for me, Mrs. Garforth, and see that they want for nothing? If you can come to Ellerslie Park this afternoon, I'll give you some money to keep in hand for them, and I'll tell you what I want done in the future. If the father risked his life and lost it for my kinsman's sake, those children ought to be in my care till they are old enough to care for themselves. You're a noble-hearted young lady, and by, when she's calmed down a bit, Susan will be as grateful to you as I am now for her sake." End of chapter 14.